BC elections, still no result. What are we? Couple days out? So they're reconciling. They've stolen the election. And now they're tasked with the unhappy chore of telling the public, we've stolen your election and sit down and be quiet because we really don't want to hear about how angry you are about that. And so that's what they're going to do. But the citizens are upset and they're saying, we're going to put up $50,000 as a reward for any kind of information that proves election interference or election rigging, theft, or anything to that effect. So there's a $50,000 reward, and we'll talk about that. But first, we have to go back in time just a little bit to when people were talking about how these voting machines, Dominion voting machines, tabulators are built by Dominion, but voting machines are also built by Dominion. And before it was Dominion, it was Smartmatic. And before it was Smartmatic, it was used in Venezuela. And there are all sorts of really interesting things about history if you care to look. And so the history here has to do with the United States, has to do with Venezuela, has to do with Pablo Escobar and Pablo Escobar's son. And he says, Dominion voting machines, Venezuela, Smartmatic. My father, Pablo Escobar, wanted to be president of Colombia. This is why they killed him. Years later, my uncle, Roberto Escobar Garavia, became well aware of these voting machines since they were offered to him by Hugo Chavez. He declined and refused to be part of the deep state. Barack Obama and Joe Biden used these machines to be placed as presidents. Yes. And Sidney Powell and real Donald Trump, Executive Order 1348. Donald Trump says in 2012, so this is a long time ago, right? He says, more reports of voting machines switching Romney votes to Obama. Pay close attention to the machines. Don't let your votes be stolen. Could you believe that, or is it believable? Because Trump started running for president somewhere around this time, 2012. There's a dinner where Trump was in attendance and Obama was making fun of him. And like you could kind of tell that this was the point where he's like, I'm going to destroy this person. I'm going to destroy this person and bring everything that they've done down onto their heads. And it's fun to watch because he's kind of pissed and like he looks kind of pissed, and usually he doesn't break the facade because he's the apprentice and he's the guy who does the apprentice and he's Donald Trump, right? Like he's usually, unflappable is not the right term, but like he usually puts on a good public face, and he was pissed. And he knows, and he knew in 2012. And now we're watching the fallout of this. But in BC, like this has to do closely with BC, but this is Sidney Powell talking about Dominion machines. Dominion is a Canadian company that bought Smartmatic and took all of its intellectual property and its machines. Smartmatic was designed and used by the CIA to place friendly people in positions of power in South America, and then it was weaponized and released by Obama. She's going to go through it. Here we go. This is from 2020. This is when the 2020 election was rigged, and Sidney Powell and Trump's attorneys, including the former mayor of New York, was out there Giuliani fighting on his behalf. And like they all got silenced. They were threatened with their careers. They were threatened, like they lost a lot to do what they did. And still, here we are 4 years later on the cusp of a re-election of Donald Trump. Do you think so? Maybe. Here's Sidney Powell talking about how they stole the election from him 4 years ago.
I can hardly wait to put forth all the evidence we have collected on Dominion, starting with the fact it was created to produce altered voting results in Venezuela for Hugo Chavez, and then shipped internationally to manipulate votes for purchase in other countries, including this one. It was funded by money from Venezuela and Cuba, and China has a role in it also. We have staggering statistical evidence. We have staggering testimony from witnesses, including one who was personally in briefings when all of this was discussed and planned, beginning with Hugo Chavez and how it was designed there, and then saw it happening in this country. As soon as the state shut down on election night and stopped counting, those are the states where the most egregious problems occurred. We also need to look at, and we're beginning to collect evidence on the financial interests of some of the governors and secretaries of state who actually bought into the Dominion systems to line their own pockets by getting a voting machine in that would either make sure their election was successful or they got money for their family from it. Well, for fraud...
So I'll pause it here because there's a bit more. It's another minute, and I don't think we need to listen to it. There's a couple of things I want to highlight and touch on for you. One of the things is that the important part, she says, is when the vote counting stopped on election night, those states that stopped counting, they had the most problems. And what was the other thing she said? Hold on. Well, with the stopping the counting, they designed that. They put that in by design into the BC election. That whole reconciliation period of time was built into the election changes that EB forced through, including phone voting, but there's a final count. So there's the count on the day of the election, but the final count is not scheduled till a week later. And when the final count is happening, sometimes it doesn't matter, right? Sometimes the final count doesn't matter because the win is so big that it doesn't matter, right? And that's happened in BC before, right? But this time the final count mattered because it's going to flip a bunch of seats back to the NDP. And the reason that that's an important thing is because Smartmatic, Dominion, those machines are designed to keep it a close race. They're designed to keep it neck and neck. And so at the end, when the whole thing is done and dusted, it looks like a very tight race. And shucks darn, your candidate lost and the communist won. Well, and the only reason you're sad about it, the only reason you're upset is because you're an evil, evil right winger and you just don't understand how, we won because our ideas are more popular, but it's false. It's faulty. That's fake. It's not true. They're cheating. Okay. And they're cheating and they know they're cheating and they're doing it at every level. And they're creating situations where they can cheat. And they're saying, no, it's above board. We're not cheating. This is how the election is supposed to work. And no, it's not. Jamie says, did election fraud happen in British Columbia? We're offering a $50,000 reward. If you have any credible evidence or information that could help ensure the integrity of our electoral process, we encourage you to come forward. Your identity will remain anonymous. In light of serious concerns regarding the integrity of British Columbia's recent election, it has become evident that the handling of ballots was marred by questionable practices of Election BC and its employees, which is overseen by Anton Bogman, the Chief Electoral Officer. The management of the advanced and mail-in ballots from October 10th to 16th and the subsequent counting period from October 26th to 28th reveal numerous operational flaws that raise the alarm about potential corruption. First, the practice of storing ballots at the homes of election officials, as admitted by Andrew Watson, Elections BC Senior Communications Director, is an egregious lapse in administrative standards. This was not an isolated incident, but a standard procedure in rural areas where convenience was prioritized over security. Equating secure storage with personal residences significantly underestimates the risks involved and invites skepticism regarding the electoral process's integrity. Yes, all of that is true. Furthermore, the treatment of in-mail and absentee ballots exposes further mismanagement. The initial unofficial tallies, which suggested races were close and are misleading by the media. Mail-in ballots were primarily used during the pandemic and now often lead to significant shifts in results. This reflects a troubling lack of understanding of electoral dynamics by those in charge, particularly under Bogman's leadership. The Elections BC guidelines on transferring ballots to new boxes for off-site storage raises additional concerns. While scrutineers are mentioned as observers, the effectiveness of this oversight is questionable. The integrity of elections relies on transparency and security, and allowing ballots to leave official election offices undermines these principles. The least we can do is utilize video camera surveillance and on all ballot boxes and the rooms where elections are held to ensure the security of the voting and counting process. It should be live streamed. For people to do with as they see fit. The dismissal of recount requests, such as those of Surrey Guildford's Gary Begg, BC, further compound these concerns. Elections BC refusals to grant these requests due to lack of evidence, despite the questionable handling of ballots, suggests a system that not only fails to protect electoral integrity, but may also favor certain outcomes. Anton Bogman's role in these practices, whether through direct involvement or negligence, places him at the heart of a troubling electoral situation. The purported security measures in place do not reflect the seriousness of safeguarding our democratic processes. While minimal fine and penalties for tampering may exist, the vulnerabilities in the system rendered these protections ineffective. One also has to question who is Elections BC recruiting with a salary of only $21 to $26 per hour in 93 ridings across British Columbia. Where is the list of names for these part-time employees? Have they been screened and can be trusted? Handling of the BC election under Bogman's leadership is not merely substandard, it constitutes a direct threat to the electoral integrity. This practice of taking ballots home, the questionable treatment of mail-in votes, phone-in votes, and the decisions surrounding recounts paints a disturbing picture of a process that borders on the farcical and potentially corrupt. I'd love to see Andy Lee's dig on Bogman. Anybody else? Hands up. Yeah. Andy Lee, go. Do your stuff. Where is Andy Lee? Is Bogman connected to China at all? If Bogman was connected to China at all, we'd already have heard of him because Andy Lee would have investigated that because she has, like, the people she works with and whatever her team is kind of skews that way a little bit. I think she said before that she has children who are Chinese. And so because of that, she speaks the language or understands the language or has active translators that she knows. Regardless, it's just interesting to me. So, because there may be Chinese connections to this whole thing. It looks like South American CIA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but the interests are actually Chinese and the ballots are coming from China as well. So there's all sorts of Chinese fingers in this pie, as far as I'm understanding it. But I'd love to see a dig. Anyway, the people of BC deserve an electoral process that is above reproach, and we must ensure that their voices are heard and protected to help uphold our democracy. This is a joint venture by increasing the reward. Please post your contribution amount, and in the comments below, all money will be rewarded upon successful criminal charges. So one of the other things that I thought about, we have representation without taxation without representation, representation without our input. Basically, they're stealing our money and doing with it whatever they want, including giving drugs to people, importing a replacement population, putting up foreigners in hotels and more, sending money to foreign wars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're doing all this to us. And if we say no, they say, no, listen, we've done a whole pretend democratic thing. Like, we went through a pre-election period, we dropped the writ, we had an election, and like, sure, all of it was completely fake. All of it was completely fake and rigged. And we knew who we wanted to win at the beginning, and we made that happen at the end. And like, we went through that and we rigged it and cheated, and you lost because we cheated. And that's it. And they want that to replace democracy. And it is currently. That's where we are. Unfortunately, we don't have an actual democratic system. We have a dog and pony show that pretends to be a democratic election system, and it's not. It's not that at all. It's a dog and pony show to make people like me sit down and shut up and then be browbeaten by their superior ability to get people out. It's bullshit and a lie. Lion Advocacy says BC election results should not be legitimized until and unless multiple independent oversight organizations review and validate the handful of votes that may end up resulting in a majority government. From the 2021 federal election interference scandal, the acts of interference that occurred are a stain on our electoral process and impacted the process leading up to the actual vote. Commissioner Marie-Jose Hogue. The Hogue Commission is a farce. Like, all of it is a farce to get us to sit down and shut. It's like the 9/11 Commission. It's a farce to get us to sit down and shut up and accept these dog and pony show results. And like, we shouldn't. We should say no. But I can't, right? And it's the people of BC who have to, right? And I mean, like, people in Canada can support, I guess, through monetary support and things like that, increasing the reward for people coming forward. But I don't know how anybody but the province of British Columbia can stand up and say no to this. You know what I'm saying? Vote Canada says, concerns over British Columbia's electoral integrity. It has become apparent that the handling of ballots during this recent election cycle was fraught with questionable practices orchestrated under the watch of Boagman, the chief electoral officer. The process by which Elections BC managed advanced voting. Okay, so this is basically the same thing I just read. So I'll leave that there. Lion Advocacy again says, besides certain rural areas of Afghanistan, Somalia, Papua New Guinea, Nauru, and Tuvalu, election officials are generally forbidden from taking ballot boxes home with them. So says ChatGPT. I mean, ChatGPT can make mistakes, so take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, that seems really weird. Now we can add British Columbia to the list. Don't worry, guys. Take those ballots home. And if you find like a bunch of ballots under your couch or something like that, stuff them into that box. Stuff them into that box for sure. Definitely. Alex is saying, has anyone questioned how the votes of the homeless were handled? What is the certification process? What riding do the unhoused or homeless live in? Who decides that? So there's all sorts of BC election fraud, and this is a response to the $50,000 reward. I think that's interesting. Drea has reached out to Boagman. She says, why the heck did Elections BC allow officials to take ballots and other sensitive documents home during early voting? Here is their response to my first inquiry after the Breaker News broke the story. The security of ballots, both unused and cast, is essential for electoral integrity. During voting proceedings, Elections BC use a variety of measures to ensure this. First and foremost, all ballots issued to a voting place are tightly controlled and accounted for. They are reconciled at each station such that officials know how many they have been issued, how many have been cast by voters, and how many are remaining. At the end of each day of advanced voting, cast ballots are secured in a ballot box that is sealed and signed by election officials and scrutineers. In urban ridings, unused ballot and ballot boxes are returned to the district office for secure storage. Where this is not possible, for example, in rural ridings where it's too far for a voting place supervisor to drive back to the district office at night, The unused ballots and sealed ballot boxes will be securely stored at the senior election official's home. This maintains the chain of custody. All election officials swear an oath of office, blah, 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 blah. So we've kind of seen that already. Tom Quiggin says the electoral process in BC is a farce. No matter the outcome of this election, it will engender nothing but mistrust on all sides. The provincial election in BC occurred on 19 October 2024. It's 26 October and there are still no results. It's a clown show. Yeah. So it's the 28th of October. And are we closer to results? There was an announcement yesterday at 1 o'clock. And like, I don't have a tweet saying new premiers announced this person or that person. Like it's not EB yet, and it's not Rustad yet. And I think they're slow walking it because they know people are pissed and they want blood and they want people to go to jail. That's what I mean by blood. They want accountability because we haven't had accountability for anything, nothing at all whatsoever. And so people are pissed. And if they come out with EB's the new premier, that it's not going to fly. So, and they're not sure how they can make it fly. So they're just going to stay shut up about it for a minute. Wait till Saskatchewan gets announced and then they'll announce it, right? Like, pretty crazy stuff. William Mackus says there's a rapid communist takeover of Canada happening right now. Welcome to the party, bud. It's overt fraud in British Columbia and Saskatchewan. And I'm afraid Alberta is being taken over from within. Yes, David, Williams is responding to David. David said, we need to fire every single elections commissioner. We need to fire every single bureaucrat who's ever recommended election tabulators or anywhere voting. We need to save our democracy from the experts who have compromised our electoral system. Saskatchewan, you're next. Yes. Yep, they are. Catherine McKenna, who lost a lot of money as the environment minister, is now celebrating that a whole bunch of the premiers are getting kicked out because of Dominion voting systems. Remember the resistance to carbon pricing, she says? Climate action, a clean economy? I sure do. Only 2 left. Voters in Saskatchewan, you have a chance on Monday, that's today, to vote for the environment, the economy, and a cleaner future for our kids. Vote Carla Beck, Saskatchewan, and vote Scott Moe out, she says. So that's what's going on. She's getting very politically involved, and people are pointing out that this is interesting coming from her recommending the NDP, right? Because she's the leader of the Saskatchewan NDP. So she's a former Liberal recommending the NDP. Did she not notice that the NDP and the federal Liberals are in a little bit of a scuffle? And the NDP federally are the same as the NDP provincially. So interesting stuff, don't you think? I think so. CBC Watcher says, highlights this. They're trying to move on from all of these scandals because, I mean, they have no response to any of these scandals. And because they have no response, they'd rather we not talk about them. So they're trying to move the news cycle forward. And a Liberal pundit speaking about unhappy Liberal MPs, I do think it's dangerous, he says, to concentrate on the number and think that it's only people who are unhappy. There are people who are that unhappy that just don't see the dissidents as giving them a path forward. So it's not even like focus on the happy people. It's like focus on the people who are just pushing their emotions down and understanding that there's no path forward. So they better quell their unhappiness, right? Here's a back and forth, 1:30. I don't know. We'll listen to all of it, but here we go.
I had an MP say to me that plans either don't materialize or they fail in what they called ruby red ridings, like Toronto, St. Paul's, and LaSalle, Mart, Verdun, which is that's a pretty damning analysis.
Yeah, if they don't, if they're not putting forward the stuff and just telling the caucus that it's coming, you're going to continue to lose trust on these issues, and this is where this festers. And now we have it boiling over with this supposed letter, or this letter of mostly anonymous MPs, which is at the same time, though, there's only 24 of them. Even if the Liberal Party had the Reform Act in place, where you could remove a leader, they wouldn't have enough to meet the threshold to have a vote. And then when you do sign that letter, it has to be public, so you have to be even braver.
I do think it's dangerous just to concentrate on that number and think those are the only people that are that unhappy. There are people that are that unhappy, but just don't see that that the dissidents are giving them a path forward. Right.
This is an interesting dynamic where the Conservative is saying it's only 24 and the Liberal saying it's actually larger. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's interesting where there's there seems to be this Rebel Alliance has no leadership in itself. They're all these individuals.
Sean Casey, who wants to put their neck out and say, I'm leading this whole thing, Justin Trudeau, and we want you out, right? Nobody does. Everybody's kind of like, oh, well, yeah, we all kind of agree together. We're all the leader together. So if you fire him, you're going to have to fire all of us, except, me, I'll stay around. So Yeah, no, it's ineffective. It was destined to fail because 24, like if all they had was 24, that's not doing it, guys. And like the rest of the Liberal backbenching caucus doesn't see the problem. And if they do, they're cowards, right? Oh yeah, no, lots more people are unhappy, but they just don't see those. They don't see holding their leadership accountable as a path forward. So awesome. We've got cowardly Liberals cowering to Chinese traders in the upper echelon of the Liberal Party and the government. And so like, what are you going to do? I guess nothing, because they're cowards. Saskatchewan votes. 49,420 people have already cast their ballots on Saturday. 273,000 ballots were cast early during early voting week, all being stored at my house, guys. This is 61% of those that voted in 2020. 61% of the votes are cast already. I wonder how many are just like in limbo, sitting in somebody's basement or garage, right? Like, or, waiting for an injection of more ballots that came from who knows where, right? 33% of registered voters have already voted in Saskatchewan. Election day is Monday, and polls are open 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Man, do you think Scott Moe's going to win another term? I think he's very popular. There are a lot of people who like him, but I haven't seen any polls. And based on the trend that's going, Higgs down, Restad not able to win, and like all of this other stuff, it's not looking good for Moe. And I mean, Danielle Smith basically mimicking Doug Ford for liberalism. Honestly, it's ridiculous. Here is Julius, and he's highlighting some important facts about Canadian voting bloc. Guess who's the biggest voting bloc in Canada? He says it's similar in other countries, but let's use Canada's stats. A thread. 1 in 4 employed Canadians work directly for one of the various branches of government. However, their share of votes is much higher than that because only around 60% of eligible Canadian voters bother to vote, but almost every public sector employee votes. They're even given paid time off to vote. So the 25% of Canadians who work in the public sector actually represent closer to 42% of the voters who bother to vote. In other words, Canadians whose salaries depend directly on the government are thus the single largest voting bloc in Canadian elections. The net result is that expansive Western-style democracy incentivizes government to view its own employees as its most important block of voters. Government for the sake of government. Now factor in everyone who benefits from government programs, subsidies, contracts, and regulatory privileges, and it becomes clear why the path to ever larger bureaucracies, ever larger government, and even ever more Robin Hood redistribution is unstoppable. Furthermore, 44% of every dollar spent in Canada is tax dollars spent by the government on citizens' behalf. With governments having this much influence, this isn't anywhere close to a free market economy anymore. This controls how the beneficiaries of that spending vote. There's more, he says. If you factor in compliance costs, the impact of tax subsidies on spending priorities, and the coercive effects of regulation, that number rises to 64% of every dollar spent in Canada that's either directly spent or indirectly controlled by the government. It's a massive gravy train. And this represents incentive that they don't want to give up. They want to continue to run that gravy train because their friends are on that gravy train and they love it. They love the gravy train. Who doesn't love gravy trains, right? Like I love send the gravy train over here. I've got some mashed potatoes. That's why it protects itself, because you got professors who are on the gravy train. You say, oh, this is very, very dangerous. And they don't say to my bottom line, to my $100,000 stipend every year that I get, to my whatever it is that they get from the government, right? Very, very dangerous, right? And then they get healthcare professionals and doctors. Oh, this is very dangerous. Children might suffer, right? Then they get education people out there. Oh, very, very dangerous. Everybody gets on board to say this is a terrible, terrible idea. But they don't mention the reason it's a terrible idea is because it's going to directly affect their bottom line. That's why. And the government pretends that they don't know because it's all kind of obfuscated by regulations that are hard to read and understand, by a gravy train that is almost impenetrable to your average voter, right? Like Julius continues, with such a colossal system of taxation, spending, and regulation, Canada's entire democracy is essentially at the mercy of keeping everyone who benefits from that gravy train happy while plundering everyone else. Yes, democratic feudalism, legitimized by the ballot box, by the rigged ballot box. The net result is economic stagnation, bureaucratic strangulation, and the suffocation of liberty. To fix this, the Robin Hood redistributionist state must be dismantled. But with these numbers, we may be past the point of no return. As long as the net beneficiaries of taxation are allowed to vote, the voting majority is incentivized to block all reforms at the ballot box, no matter the cost to the country. No one burns the bridge they're standing on. This is how progressive democracy led to servitude. Yes, I think he's right. I think he's exactly right. So pretty crazy stuff. Christopher says, if they identify some fraudulent mail-in ballots in Colorado, it's likely more has gone undetected. Same in BC. Seems because votes past signature verification, they cannot be remedied or removed, even though they were found to be fraudulent. Why? I think in-person voting with ID is the only way. So here's more evidence of voter shenanigans, voting shenanigans, all through. Colorado election officials say they identified at least a dozen fraudulent ballots. It's like rats or mice. You see one rat, or cockroaches. You see one cockroach. There's more cockroaches, right? You see one fraudulent ballot. I'm sure there's other ones. 3 of the ballots made it through the process and will count. Colorado's Secretary of State said. Yes, these 3 counted. Victor says Georgia, Pennsylvania, and now Tennessee have become the latest states to report instances of election fraud, including Dominion voting systems allegedly flipping votes. These aren't isolated incidents, but rather a wave of complaints pouring in. Yeah, this is happening all over the states currently, flipping votes as far as I understand it. I don't think this is from 2020. This is the current early voting system. And Dominion is flipping these votes. Here we go.
Shelby County Election Commission member Venetia Kimbrough says several voters reported at least one incident at 10 to 12 precincts across the county. Representatives G.A. Hardaway and Antonio Parkinson, state lawmakers, both on the ballot and part of the Shelby County Democratic Caucus, say they received several calls from voters today. Here's a list of some of the voting sites provided to Action News 5 where voters said they had difficulty pressing one candidate. They said that their vote would change from the Democratic candidate to the Republican candidate. Now, Kimbrough says voters must press the name of the candidate and not the box next to the candidate's name. Remember, we're using these new touchscreens for the second time, but this is the largest election we're using them in, this new equipment. Now, Valencia.
Remember, use the touchscreen to touch the name, not the box beside the name of the candidate. I know it's tricky. And I mean, like, it's kind of designed to be tricky, right? Like, really. Here is this is not CTV News. This is MSNBC talking about Donald Trump's rally and saying like it's exactly the same thing as Hitler in 1939. Here we go.
But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. When a Jewish protester rushed the stage, the Associated Press reported, quote, instantly, a dozen or more storm.
So pretty crazy stuff. We'll listen to the rest of it, but they're showing footage of a 1939 Madison Square Garden Nazi rally. And you have to wonder, like, why was the United States welcoming Hitler at that period of time? The Second World War kicked off right around that time, right? So what's going on? Most people have absolutely no idea about the history of the First World War, the Second World War, the Balfour Declaration, what went on and why all of this happened. Like why people in the United States were having a big rally for Hitler in 1939 in Madison Square Gardens and everybody was excited about it, right? Like, do you think all these were Germans who came here? Like who came to Madison Square Gardens to rally for Hitler? Probably not. Probably New Yorkers, probably people from the United States to come in and talk about this. So why was that happening? It's super funny that the mainstream media is pointing this out and like, don't look too much into it. Certainly don't read books written by the people who are participating in these events. But we should tell you that a Jewish protester got beat up, right? Like, we'll listen to the rest of this. Hold on.
Adolf Hitler packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. When a Jewish protester rushed the stage, the Associated Press reported, quote, instantly, a dozen or more stormtroopers set upon him, knocking him down and beating him as he held his head in his arms. Most of his clothing was torn from his body. Later, he was booked for disorderly conduct. Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within, who has threatened to use the troops to quell what he says are lawless cities, and to use those troops to carry out mass deportations of immigrants, is once again turning Madison Square Garden into a staging ground for extremism.
Right? So this is they did this in 1939 and Donald Trump is doing it again now, right? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Ryan says Canadian media doing what they do best. They really are all in this together. CTV News says speakers at Trump Madison Square Gardens event crudely denounced Harris and Democrats. Trump's Madison Square Garden event begins with crude jokes and denunciations of critics. So they're doing everything they can to Antichrist. Billed as his closing pitch to voters, Donald Trump's Madison Square Garden rally in New York on Sunday features a series of crude and racist insults delivered by the former president's allies. So Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, Tulsi Gabbard, all of these people are the Antichrists, right? Like, it's pretty incredible. Here is Trump calling out what's happened in the West, and he's saying, I won't let it happen in the United States. And this is what they're calling extremism. It's not extreme to demand safe cities. It's not extreme to demand illegals be removed from a country that they entered illegally. It's certainly not extreme to want to have the America for your children that you grew up in, right? Or the Canada that we grew up in for our kids, right? And I mean, like, we don't have it. And nobody in Canada seems to be wanting to fight for it. It's really interesting. Donald Trump seems to be wanting to fight for it in the United States, and he's got people on his side who want to fight for it too. But in Canada, they really like socialism. It's really weird, really, really strange. Here is Trump saying what's happening in England and what's happening in London. And what's the other one he says? Well, I'll just let him say it. Here we go.
We've seen what happened when Europe opened their doors to jihad. Look at Paris. Look at London. They're no longer recognizable. And I'm going to get myself into a lot of trouble with the folks in Paris and the folks in London. But you know what? That's the fact. They are no longer recognizable, and we can't let that happen to our country. We have incredible culture, tradition. Nothing wrong with their culture, their tradition. We can't let that happen here, and I'll never let it happen to the United States of America.
Good for him. And to speak that plainly will get you called a Nazi by the mainstream media, right? Like, it's absolutely crazy. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful